I am delighted to have opportunity today to stand before you as the son of Africa. I was born in Kenya, but I'm told that my grandparents came from the Sudan. I am a father of 4, a grandfather of 5, and a husband of 1 that I know of. I am an engineer by profession, and I have been an academic. I have also been a public servant. I've been a member of parliament. I've also been a prime minister and also leader of opposition. In those capacities, I've tried to do my best, and I've gained a lot of experience in terms of management of public affairs. I stand here as an Pan-Africanist and an Afro-optimist. 2 months ago, that is on the 21st of October, this year, we were here in Addis Ababa. We had been invited as members of the families of the founding fathers of the African Union to come and witness the reopening of the Africa Hall. That's the hall where the OAU was launched in 1963. And we're happy to be here with Madam Ambassador Konjit, who was there as a young girl at that time. It is now 61 years since the launch of the Organization of African Unity. And at that time, if you read the speeches of the founding fathers on that day, they were very passionate, and all of them talked about African unity. Where there was a difference was, when do we achieve this unity? There are those who, under the school of thought, that the unity now. There are those who said, no, we need to be gradual in this. Let us first build the building blocks, the regional unions, which will eventually translate into formation of the African Union as a whole. But now we have come up, they came up 50 years later with Vision 2063, which now hopes to get Africa united, one union government by 2030, and move on to attain the vision, the wishes of the founding fathers of Africa. I say that I have the experience. I've been part of this movement for changing the continent. You know that some achievements have been made. Africa is now completely liberated, but there's still work to do. And I believe that I have what it takes to get us where we want to do. In the field of education, in the field of health, in the field of value addition to the abundant wealth that we have on the continent, in the field of trade, inter-African trade. I have acted as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure. And in this I know that we have very comprehensive programs in PIDA, Program for Infrastructure Development of the Continent. What remains is action. And what I want to promise the African people is that I am going to lead from the front to ensure that we achieve the visions of the founding fathers of our continent.
My name is Mahmoud Ali Youssouf. I am 59 years old. I'm married with 8 children. Minister of Foreign Affairs of Djibouti for the past 20 years. And I am standing before you this evening to give you a brief presentation of my vision for Africa's future. Africa is at a crossroads of its evolution. Of course, it is actually lagging behind other continents in terms of peace and security, integration, and socioeconomic development. But Africa is moving forward. Africa is getting itself organized, and Africa is doing its level best to be on the international stage. The Africa that we want, an integrated, peaceful, and prosperous one, is first the choice of our people before the choice of its leaders. The founding fathers of the OAU in 1963 and to our leaders today who actually established the African Union more than 20 years, all the way down to the average citizen, we are trying to consolidate our diversity and to cement the unity of the continent. As we adopted Agenda 2063 and also the five plans, the African Union actually has a roadmap to achieve its goals, and the African Union is supposed to coordinate and also to implement the decisions of the policy organs. And if I am elected as chairperson of the commission, I am going to make sure that we work together, and we actually have to go beyond the 37% of the work that we have done so far. In terms of peace and security and early warnings, through the Continental Early Warning System, we are going to strengthen the Peace and Security Council, which has to be more proactive, and the member states will also have to be responsible. The panel of the wise would be given the means to work to continue its mediation work, and I will do my level best to make sure that resources are mobilized to make the African standby force operational, and we can also use the African Peace Fund. And with the relevant bodies, I am going to continue or to carry out the reforms which have not been implemented today, and I'm going to diversify our financing, and I will do my best to make sure that African Union has its own financing sources. And I'm also going to boost intra-African trade. We should go beyond 80%, and I will bring down all the non-tariff barriers and facilitate the free movement of goods and persons across the continent. The place of Africa on the international stage will be one of my, and I'm going to be the voice of our women, of course, and the diaspora too, through knowledge, technology, in agriculture, in industry, and in the service sector. The Africa that we want, ladies and gentlemen, is an Africa of peace, integration, and prosperity. And this has to go through the political will and the solidarity of the African people, and thanks to the support of our people. And so as I stand in front of you today and in front of all the millions of Africa, I want to tell you that if I'm given the chance of being the chairperson of this commission, I will do my best to make sure that our continent shines on the international stage. I thank you.
Africa is, of course, the least developed continent by comparison. Look at economic statistics. But this is because there are historical reasons why Africa is where it is today. And we will say that Africa does not need to remain here. We need to develop Africa. There are several factors which work against Africa. For example, the international financial infrastructure has worked very much against Africa, because African countries have been made to borrow money at a very high rate of interest compared to other countries of the same status as the African countries. So we need to address the issue of rearranging the international financial infrastructure. That is, I think, one of the major starting points. Now, Africa is the richest continent on the planet Earth in terms of raw materials. But it's a paradox that Africa also is the poorest in terms of living conditions. We say that we need not remain for perpetually the source of raw materials for industrial west or east. That we need to do value addition to raw materials which are coming out of Africa before we export them. Then we've also said that Africa needs to trade more with itself. There's big potential. Like the African Development Bank today says that 7 out of the 20 fastest growing economies in this year are going to be African countries. That are much higher than Europe. We're only competing with Asia. So it is important that Africa enhances the trade with itself. The inter-African trade today stands at just mere 15%. Now we have the African Free Trade Area organization that was launched now 3 years ago, but not much has been achieved. Some of the reasons are issues that are actually solvable. The non-tariff barriers to trade that have been imposed by respective African countries. Things like standards, which are different from one country to the other country, making it difficult for goods to move freely across the borders. Then modalities of payment. And then there's the other issue of infrastructure. I worked for 5 years as the African Union High Representative on Infrastructure Development. And here is another problem, because goods cannot move freely because of lack of adequate infrastructure within the continent. Kenya exported tea to Ghana, and it took 3 months of tea to travel from Kenya to Ghana. We have major infrastructure projects, the high-speed continental railway, the inter-African highways, Cape to Cairo, Tunis to Cape, Dakar to Djibouti, Dakar, Lagos, Mombasa, and so on and so forth. All these need to be developed. Energy is another factor. Energy is too expensive, but we can reduce the cost of energy and go green in the continent.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya, et à présent, mesdames et messieurs.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti. When you talk about the riches of Africa, we often think about natural resources, and the riches of Africa begins with its people. We have 1.4 billion inhabitants on the continent, and more than 60% of this population is young, between 0 and 25 years. The first wealth of this continent is in its people. We must have the capacity to think about how we can ensure that these people, this population, can benefit not only from the existing wealth, but also add value to that wealth. How can we go about that? Through universal education, quality education in our countries. We should have the capacity of offering our citizens a free education from the primary to the university levels, and ensure that this education is spread in all of the regions of our continent and of our country. We must remove the obstacles to education. The feminine population represents 50.2%. There are still cultural obstacles. There are obstacles to the education of girls. We must concentrate on valorizing our human resources. And then we have fertile land. What are we doing with this fertile land? We are still in many countries using very archaic agriculture. It is time to begin to develop an agriculture that I would call modern. It does exist in many countries. Look, for example, at a country such as Rwanda. Tea and coffee are actually, there's value added locally. Countries such as Ghana, countries such as Cote d'Ivoire, cocoa is transformed locally. Now, these raw products that we sell without adding value, we must be able to add value locally so that we can increase the wealth and and also create employment. The transformation of agricultural products is a priority. So today, agriculture in many countries uses biotechnology. It uses the drip system. It uses seeds that are modified, that are quality seeds. Ethiopia uses quality seeds in order to be able to produce maize. Today, Ethiopia produces maize and wheat because of these seeds that are quality seeds. It is important to think about transforming agricultural product in place that will ensure that the people can get out of food insecurity, ensure that there is a specialized agriculture. There has to be areas of specialized agriculture, and that, I would say, is one of the steps that will lead to ensuring that this world there can be at the benefit of the population. And then we come to natural resources. I acknowledge the work by President Museveni. He has said that he will not export petrol or gas as long as there will not be a refinery in Uganda. These are the examples from African leaders who take the destiny of their people in hand so that they can actually have a value added locally. Now, trade, everybody knows that it is through trade that development happens. Look at China. China and all over the Chinese economy really target production and exportation. When you add value to our products, we can become exporters. Let me talk about tariff barriers and non-tariff barriers. That is not the problem. I think that the situation must be to, first of all, protect our wealth by transforming them locally. Thank you. Thank you, Your Excellency Mahmoud Ali Youssouf.
Of round one, where I'm happy to announce we have a 5-minute break, and after this break we come to round two. You have been tuned in to us here from the...
First and foremost, we have to understand that we are living in a world which is multipolarized world. This is a world that is actually multipolarized, and this world would not provide space for a continent or countries that do not have the right economies, the military strength, the capacity that is required, and mostly that continent or country that is not on the world stage. This is a reality. So what can we do? What should we do? I think it is very important that the global south should actually take action, and in the global south it is Africa that actually has to stand out. And how is Africa going to stand out if we do not represent much in terms of global trade? You cannot actually sit around a table where decisions are being taken for the destiny of the world. And so integration is, I would say, an obligation, is a must. When we talk about obligation, it is important that the AFCFTA should actually be functional. It is important that intra-Africa trade be developed, and it should go beyond 18%. It is important that African countries should actually use their own resources. And so Africa has now a seat and the G20 table. We want to congratulate South Africa for chairing the G20 next year. And so it is important that the African Union Commission should be working hand in hand with the African Union to actually make sure that Agenda 2063 is a priority item on the agenda of Agenda 2063 of the G20. Africa has to be also on the UN Security Council. Just imagine 80% of the issues discussed at the UN Security Council is African problems. When we talk about security issues, who do we talk about? Africa. When we talk about food insecurity, we also hear Africa, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Ethiopia, Kenya, Somalia. They have actually been victims of natural disasters, but we are not the ones polluting the world. So the African Union should also be fully involved in the COP discussions. The COP discussions should also be held here in Africa. So a strong Africa has to be an Africa that is present on the global stage. We have to see that Africa has to be part and parcel of the global south, and this is what we have to do. And I'm going to make sure that our commission is going to work to ensure that Africa is part of the global south. Integration is a long-winded effort. It goes through solidarity. We are not working among ourselves. We are not speaking to one another as neighbors. We'd rather trade with non-African countries because we have non-tariff barriers, because our currencies are not convertible. Our currencies are not convertible. If I want to trade in birr with Ethiopia, and Ethiopia wants to trade in France, definitely there is loss of money. So we should have a payment and compensation system in Africa. We have to mobilize resources between 5 and 10 billion so that this compensation system is functional. Are we going to have a single currency in Africa? Why not? That is possible.
2020. We are today in 2024, and the guns are not silent. They're very loud, roaring all over the continent. We need to address the causative factors of these conflicts. There are some which are conflict caused by poverty or deprivation. Some of them by conflict within the society, again, things like ethnicity and so on. Some of them are externally influenced or promoted. Some are religious and so on. So there's not a common factor. But what you need to do is to address the causative factors which could translate into these conflicts throughout the continent. And this is what I will do myself. First, as you know that our African countries are not at the same levels of development. Those which are more developed, like for example in terms of governance, there are some areas where you have got exclusions of people, and as a result of this, there's some people move to use other means. We need to find a way of creating an environment of dialogue within our societies so that we can be able to prevent these differences, conflict ending up into violent confrontation between the various groups. We don't need to put a time span, but I'm sure that it is possible to end these conflicts and stop the guns by 2035, in my view. The other one is the issue of Africa's representation on the Security Council. This is something that has been long overdue. As you know, that the UN was formed at a time when most part of Africa were colonies. And that's why the UN structure as today does not deal with the realities of the world today. And the situation where you have 5 countries sitting in the Security Council with veto powers, and Africa is not represented, a continent with 1.4 billion people, is not tenable and it's not accessible. And that's why I'm not going to talk about Africa's representation, but we're going to insist that Africa must get 2 permanent seats in the UN Security Council. This is only fair, because we are a continent of 55 sovereign nations. We cannot be excluded when Europe has got 3 permanent representations on the Security Council. Permanent representation with the veto powers is a must for Africa. And this I'm going to insist when I'm elected. If the heads of state of Africa sees fit that I should lead this, I will work together with all the leadership of the continent to ensure that the continent gets a fair treatment on the international scene.
Thank you so much, Excellency. Candidate from Kenya. Et maintenant, mesdames et messieurs.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, the response from His Excellency, the candidate from Djibouti, His Excellency Mahmoud Ali Youssouf.
Silencing the Guns is a flagship program, one of the 15 that our leaders have endorsed years ago. And then they put a number of mechanisms and structure around this flagship program so that peace becomes a reality on our continent. The first structure is the African Peace and Security Architecture. And then we have the strategy that we all know, Silencing the Guns. And to support this strategy, the African Union put in place a number of mechanisms. One of them is the Peace and Security Council. The other one is the Committee of Elders, the Committee of Chief of Staff. We have the Peace Fund, and we can rely on every kind of mechanism. So why is peace is not, let's say, a reality on the ground on our continent? There are a number of reasons. One of them is the political will of countries. We have to be outspoken and frank. We make decisions at the Peace and Security Council level. These decisions are not implemented. Our Peace and Security Council is not proactive. It is reacting to crises when they occur and happen. This has to change. And I'm sending a message to our member countries saying this has to change. The number two problem that we have to face is our standby forces. We have them on the papers. Of course, sometimes we can mobilize them, but they lack resources. We are still relying on foreign partnership for our resources. Let me give you an example. AMISOM. Since 2007, ATMIS has been financed by the European Union and the United Nations, up to 2.7 billion euros. Now, financial resources are critical. Why should we have the money so that we can operate on crisis ground on the continent? Because without money, we cannot deploy our standby forces. Without money, even the committee of mediators cannot go and discuss with the stakeholders. They sometimes wait for the tickets, the per diems, days and days and days. It's very critical that the Peace Fund, in which we have $400 million, that the Commission and the PRC, get to the compromise situation where that money could be used for peace on the continent. So far, only the interest of the 400 millions are used. And I'm really shameful when I say, DRC have been given 1 million for a peace, issues through this fund. And they have given to, another country 1.5 million. It has to change. We need the authority from the member countries so that we can use this money, the $400 million, to keep peace on our continent. There are so many other bottlenecks that needs to be handled very quickly. But money is one of them. The Peace and Security Council mission is the second problem. And then we have a third one. This one also has to be underlined very, very seriously. When a crisis happens, I give you the example of Somalia. I've been around for some time. I've been dealing with this problem for many years. When there is no unity of purpose between the countries around this country, neighboring countries, this country will never stand on its feet. That's what we are experiencing today in the Sudan. Hundreds of thousands of people have been killed, millions displaced. Neighboring countries are still fighting on the Sudan, and the African Union and IGAD are watching.
Sorry, sir, your time is up.
Okay, sorry, because I can talk hours about this issue.
No problem, sir. Thank you so much for your contribution. And ladies and gentlemen, as a reminder, especially to our esteemed candidates, if you go beyond the time, I will be forced to interrupt, and I don't want to do that, so please forgive me.
Thank you. Well, I mentioned earlier on about the inter-African trade, which today stands just at 15%. Inter-European trade, on the other hand, stands at 70%. Inter-Asian trade stands at 60%. Africa trades more with the external world than with itself, wasting a lot of resources. Now, how did Europeans come from behind and leapfrog and overtake Africa? That is something that we need to ask ourselves. But here we need to now look forward to see how we can be able to make use of this huge domestic market that we have. We have a population of 1.4 billion people. And that is what has helped China. China did two things. One was to train the younger generation, the youth, so that they had a very highly skilled manpower. And when they liberalized their economy, the manufacturing unit in the West rushed to China. If you go to China, for example, take the automobile, the Ford, the Jeep, the BMW, the Mercedes, the Toyota, the Nissan, they're all there in China. And because there was cheap, highly skilled, cheap labor, secondly, cheap raw material. The raw materials which they were actually getting originally from Africa. And that is how China has managed to develop a 600 million people middle class. Africa can be able to fill the gap which is being left down there by China by actually coming together and opening up. So we need to come together as Africa and create an African market which will be able to attract investors to come to our continent. Africa is the youngest continent in terms of population. 70% of our population is below the age of 35. That is a big bonus. It can be a bonus or it can be a curse. If the youth are not empowered, given requisite knowledge and skills, they become a drug to society, drunkards, drug addicts, and criminals. But empowered, they become a real source for wealth creation. It is a pity today that many African youths drown in the Mediterranean trying to seek greener pastures in Europe because you have not created conditions that can retain them here. Now we are saying that we want to create a situation where every African youth must be connected to the internet, and using the artificial intelligence and information technology, we can be able to give this youth opportunity to work anywhere in the world when they're staying here on the continent. This is something that we are going to address, empowerment of the African youth, and together with the African woman, so that we create a workforce that will be helped in terms of wealth creation on the continent. This will enable Africa to leapfrog and to catch up with the rest of the world. I'm saying that I want to be a vehicle to be used to help Africa to get there. We will work together with all the leadership in the continent. We know where we are as African Union, and that's why the heads of state came up with that committee on reforms, which was headed by former president, current Rwanda President Kagame. The chairmanship has now been passed over to Honorable William Ruto, President of Kenya. I have had long discussions with President Kagame when he was chairing that committee, because I was working as a high representative of the AU on issues of infrastructure. And I know the kind of frustrations that you feel working that way. I know that 93% of the resolutions that are passed by the heads of state at the assembly are never implemented. Now there's some of them are resolutions which were probably not necessary. Some of them are not implementable, but majority of them are just not implemented. Some have to do with the structure and management of the AU at the headquarters. I'm not trying to pass any judgment here because I know that Mr. Faki has worked very hard to try to make the organization move forward. The other one has been the issue of funding, which has been a major challenge, and look at other alternative sources of funding. When I was there as High Rep on infrastructure development, we came up with a proposal to set up an infrastructure fund for Africa, and using the African resources, because many of African countries have got a lot of money in sovereign funds, from which the AU can actually borrow without having to pay so much high interest. And this will help AU actually to spearhead the process of constructing some of these infrastructures. I mentioned the Trans-African Railway Network, Lagos to Cairo, the high speed. Then you have got Beira in Mozambique to Lobito in Angola and Walvis Bay in Namibia. Then you have got the Lapset, which will come from Lamu in Kenya, running through South Sudan, Central Africa to Caribbean Cameroon, to create a land bridge that opens the interior of Africa and gives these landlocked countries in the continent access to the sea. So some of these are possible, but we need to think out of the box and ensure that most of these reforms which are being proposed are implemented. We were talking about energy, which is a very major issue, and we have got the Grand Inga in the Congo, which can actually power the entire continent with power pools, southern power pool, eastern power pool, central, western, and northern power pool. That will help us to lower the cost of energy in the continent. That would be a revolutionary change on the continent. Then you've got the connectivity, fiber optic connectivity, open skies, opening up the skies for movement of people, and then visas. To do visas is a big issue. Many African businessmen cannot travel across the continent without, because they don't have visas.
Excellency, I'm really sorry to interrupt you. Les 4 minutes se sont écoulées. Nous allons maintenant suivre.
We are going now to listen to the response from the last candidate for this round, the candidate from Djibouti.
Let me start by paying tribute to our heads of states who have endorsed those reforms in 2017. And then the champion for those reforms was His Excellency President Kagame, and he passed the responsibility to President Ruto. Now, there are a number of reforms that have already been implemented. We have to recognize that. The size of the commission, we had 10 commissioners, chairperson, deputy chairperson, and 8 commissioners, and it has been reduced. We have what we call a golden rule in terms of managing the staff and the personnel. I'm still waiting for the SACA program to be implemented. I hope that this hot potato will not wait for us, one of us, when we'll be elected. But I hope that the SACA process will be implemented. It is about the personnel, the staff. We have moved from a lot of short contract employees to a permanent contract. That's very important. If you want to create loyalty, you want to create the ownership within your staff and personnel, you have to make them happy. They need to have a permanent contract, and it is in the SACA program. Now, the biggest bottleneck of the reforms is the financing. Our heads of state said we will pay 0.2% of eligible import to the Commission. Only 17 countries, 17, are applying and abiding by that rule. It has to change. I'm not going to impose that on our leaders. It's not my intention, but I will advocate for it. It's very important to have, that particular issue of mobilizing and fostering financing be resolved immediately. Then, our experts, there is a unit in the African Union Commission called the Reform Unit, led by Mr. Makoko, a very able African expert. But there are so many reforms that have not been implemented. One of them is PAP, the Pan-African Parliament. It's still a consultative organ. When is the Pan-African Parliament will become a legislative organ? They have passed in 2014 a protocol. Only 15 countries ratified that protocol. And this is one of the major reforms that we have to implement. Then we have on the judicial sector, the Court of Justice, the Commission of Human Rights. Sometimes they are fighting on issues. The Court of Justice do not open its doors to nationals, to African citizens, to NGOs. They are complaining. I am hearing complaints about the African citizens with regard to the Court of Justice. And then they are fighting who is doing what, the Commission of Human Rights. These reforms have to be implemented. And the Bureau of Liaison, a liaison bureau, we have so many on the continent. That's double use of those bureaus. Time is running, time is flying. So we have to rationalize. How can you imagine that you have 3 bureaus in the same region? And we're saying we should have the golden rules for management. And whenever we want to touch one of the bureaus, it's a political matter. It's useless, but it is a political matter. The country that is hosting the bureau is saying, you won't touch it. It has to change. It needs leadership, it needs understanding, negotiation, but it has to change. If we want to change things, we have to be frank and outspoken. We have to be, really tough when it comes to be tough, and lean when it comes to we have to do it. We have to do it.
Your last words. We will start this round with His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. I am delighted to have the opportunity to address people of Africa. And as I've said, I am ready to work for Africa. There are reforms that will be necessary so that the EU can work more effectively. One of these reforms will be financial reforms, so that we are able to bring in the African private sector into the funding. I mentioned also the issue of sovereign funds that we can use. We can create a fund that will enable AU to do all its money work. Then there's issue of 0.2% of the duty, which only 17 countries are remitting. I will work to ensure that all the countries actually pay their dues to the Union. This is what happens in the European Union, and that's why European Union is able to even fund African Union. It's a shame. We can be able to fund this organization out of our own resources on the continent, and this is what I'm going to try to do. And I said that I am ready on day one when I'm appointed. I will not need any kind of induction. I'm ready to work for the continent, and I will offer my best. The days of Africa have come. The African lion will begin to roar and tell its Asian tiger counterpart and the European bear and the American jaguar that this is going to be Africa's millennium. The 2000.
Dear candidate, I'm really sorry to interrupt you once again, but these are the rules of the debate. Nous allons maintenant, mesdames et
we are going now, ladies and gentlemen, give 2 minutes to the candidate of Djibouti closing remarks.
Thank you so much, and let me speak in Arabic. I would like to say that if I will be elected as the chair of the African Union Commission, I will be up to your aspirations, and I will defend the interests of our continent, and I will work diligently to defend our continent, and with the full modesty, I think that I deserve it.
Je souhaite à nos pays, à nos peuples africains.
So I wish for our African people, our countries, a very happy 2025.
Africans tonight, I wish to all African nations and citizens all the best. Thank you for your support.